media and technology tycoons surrounding the president at his White House inauguration, from Alphabet, right, the parent company, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, TikTok, X, you name it. They're the people who control the screens. They're the people who control the networks and the technologies that propagate the lies that we're forced to inhale every day.
Hello, welcome to Cambridge Forum, coming to you live via Zoom. I'm Mary Stack, the Executive Director, and today we're looking at the role of the moving image in our lives, its power and its popularity. Video has become today's dominant medium of communication. 2/3 of global internet traffic is video, and that number is continuing to climb. Most Americans get their news and information from screens and speakers rather than the printed word. And the impact of video has no precedent in history. Right now, hundreds of billions of cameras around the world are busy recording and producing more images, and we're one of them. This force, Orwell would term it the telescreen, exerts enormous influence over what we think, how we act, and how we feel. In propelling personalities like Trump, Putin, Musk, et al. To the front of the world stage, the screen commands our attention and sets the agenda for what's important. But who is actually controlling the moving image? Peter B. Kaufman is a senior program officer at MIT Open Learning, founder of Intelligent Television, and author of the new book, The Moving Image. He's joined by Robert S. Boynton, director of the Literary Reportage program at NYU's Arthur L. Carter Journalism Institute. His articles have appeared in the New Yorker, Harper's, The Atlantic Monthly, New York Times Magazine, Rolling Stone, and many others. Welcome to you both. Thanks for giving us your time to join the forum today.
Pleasure.
Okay, Peter, let's start with you. I know you wrote this book for several reasons, not least that because print journalism has a style book and video doesn't seem to have one for producing and distributing and preserving these images. You decided to write a textbook of sorts. But the book serves several other purposes. One, of course, is the elephant in the room, which is the overwhelming presence, pervasive presence of video in our lives from morn till night. So how did this sneaky revolution happen?
Mary, first of all, let me thank you for hosting us today and the Cambridge Forum's great work. So the answer, like the sneaking up of video on our existence, world society, has multiple parts. First of all, as fancy as everything seems to us today with our like YouTubes and our iPhones, TikToks, Netflixes, we are in the very first years of the moving image, the dawn of our age of the moving image, maybe. The sun rose, if that's a thing, like the dawn, whatever, for the first time in 1895, according to a lot of people who create calendars of this kind and timelines, when the Lumiere brothers first rolled a film in Paris for the public in a paying venue. And in the book, I draw on the history of the book immediately after Gutenberg started operating his press. And from where we are now, like 600 years in, it's pretty clear how fast print came to dominate the world of, you know, the 1500s, the pre-Enlightenment, and then, of course, the Enlightenment. But from the perspective of the people at the time, it was what the historian Elizabeth Eisenstein, who's quoted at some length in this thing, described as a completely elusive revolution. Nobody noticed it. Just like now, you know, just like what propels your question. So today, even though print had a 400-year head start, you know, between the time of Gutenberg and the time of the Lumiere brothers, the moving image has come to dominate. Look at us right now. we're talking over this in this medium, but it's still so young. And imagine 130 years after Gutenberg started to crank up that press. If you do the math, you're in like the 1580s, and not exactly a time of marvels for the print medium. It was like Bibles and some broadsheets. I mean, that is, the comparison that's worth making.
I
It's
think it is very,
fast.
very worthwhile. I think the difference is that the technologies all happened very fast. I mean, we went from film where you sit in a cinema and everyone's amazed, right? And then you have video, and I remember that evolution of video because I worked in television very fast
Mhm.
from one thing to another. And then you had this, and then all roads have led to this. It seems to have replaced everything: conversation, sending letters. Our whole method of communication has been diminished. And people think if they see it on here, it's true. It's got to be true, right? If it's on a screen, which I find amazing. There's this culpability. Anyway,
But
Rob,
let me say one thing, but
yeah,
don't forget that this was only invented in 2007, and we all thought we'd be talking on it. I ask my students at the beginning of many classes, I say, what do you do with this? No one talks on the phone.
No.
Students are
everybody.
allergic to talking on the phone. They don't make phone calls. They hate getting them. So it takes, as to Peter's point, we always assume looking back that however we use the technology was the way it was intended to be used. But the fact is, any historian of technology or science knows that technology takes a while for us to learn actually how to use it and what its importance is. And I think this is one of the important points that Peter's making in the book.
So while we're on the topic of journalism, Rob, you're a professor of journalism at NYU for your sins, teaching tomorrow's journalists. In the light of all the clampdowns, recent clampdowns in the last few weeks, and disrespect for the press, has there ever been a worse time in American history to be a journalist?
It's a good question, and it's certainly something that my students are asking me, and I don't, alas, don't have really good answers. I mean, I tell them that we are as astonished and shocked as they are, and it's not as if we sit in a position where we have seen this all before or something. We really we haven't, at least in these regimes. In fact, some colleagues of mine and I are putting on a discussion for my students, and we're having representatives of journalists who have worked in repressive regimes, Syria, Iran, North Korea, China, India now with Modi cracking down on the journalists, as sort of trying to get some sort of advice, some sort of lessons from them. It's certainly the most dangerous time to be a journalist. More journalists, the Committee to Protect Journalists have reported more journalists have been killed in the last few years than all the years before that. It's a terrible time to be covering a war or something like that. The good news is that for journalists who are willing to embrace technology and are innovative and creative, it's never been an easier time, or not easy is the wrong word, but it's never been a more sort of fruitful time to try to engage journalism, whether through podcasting, whether through short form video. You know, the digitization of recording of all sorts has meant that the costs for all that kind of work has gone way, way, way down. And the distribution paths for it, the old ones have died or are dying, but the new ones are being born all the time. So, I would say it's not a good time to be a 50 or 60-year-old magazine writer, as I am. That world is all but dead. But
Mhm.
to be 21 and to be really excited about telling stories and using all sorts of multimedia technology that you have all on your laptop and your phone, it's a pretty good time to be around. And storytelling is going to triumph no matter what the medium, what the medium does.
It's very interesting. You just said something almost accidentally, and it's very much the jargon of the day that you tell stories. And I find this, it on some level, it just jars with me because this whole idea of the line between fact, fiction, faction is all lovely and alchemy, well, it's kind of true, kind of sort of. Um, Telling stories is one thing.
Mhm.
Telling the truth is another is another thing. And I think we've got to be a bit more clear about that. I don't know how you put the genie back in the bottle, but this competing truth, the marketplace of competing truth, I like to think of it. And we've got all these loose terms now for accommodating lies. We've got fake news, we've got post-truth, and then we've got Marshall McLuhan, who 60 years ago said, the medium is the message. Is it true? Why is TV or the screen so believable? So I'm going to ask both of you, did Marshall McLuhan have something there with the medium is the message?
Who goes first?
You do, of course.
I do. I do really. Okay, thanks, Robert. Um, the yeah, my favorite term is truth decay. But
That's
McLuhan, gets quoted in the introduction to this book. He wrote Understanding Media, the Extensions of Man. And he asked 60 years ago, don't we need, it was a rhetorical question, to save ourselves from surrendering our senses and nervous systems to the private manipulation of those who try to benefit from taking a lease on our eyes and ears and nerves, such that we don't really have any rights left before we have irrevocably and permanently leased our central nervous systems to various corporations. And um, that was a prescient question. We'll hopefully get into that a little bit more. But there's also this crazy thing, I mean, to your specific point, Mary, which is that for most of human existence, and I go into this like an idiot, the overwhelming preponderance of human existence, hundreds, thousands of, tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands, if you count in a certain way, we've communicated without print with one another. We've communicated even without writing. And it may be in the end, Rob, you and I were talking about this the other day, that this is the Gutenberg parenthesis, as Jeff Jarvis speaks of it, that we are, returning in some strange sense, horrifying perhaps as it sounds to most of the audience, to a kind of primitive precondition that we have. And that may be something that a number of people, the best of us and the worst of us, and we all know who I'm thinking of anyway, recognize.
And to pick up on that, this idea of the medium is the message. I mean, it depends on the time. I was just teaching yesterday Susan Sontag's essay about photography in Plato's Cave, and at one point she talks about the power of photography is the fact that it verifies things, that you can use it in a way to verify a fact or something, that people will believe what they see in a photograph completely, whereas in print they will not. She doesn't really go on to talk about video in that. But I think that is much of the role it plays. Video plays now. People instinctively believe it because they think it's true, which is a little why I've been a little bit surprised with all the possibilities of deep fakes that we were sort of 2 or 3 years ago really worried about, that we've seen. I mean, we've seen them, but I mean, there hasn't really been deep fake that I've known of that's really created a terrible misunderstanding of some sort that was being used to great effect. The Gutenberg parentheses idea that Peter brings up is one that I'm particularly fascinated by. It's essentially the idea that with the invention of movable type, or the Chinese invented it with the concoction of movable type, and then up to the current day, we believe that knowledge was bound to words, and that words were bound to knowledge in a very specific way.
Mm-hmm.
And we sort of understood the world as having a sort of grammatical sense because of this technology and the way we've used it. That perhaps we've come to the end of that parentheses, that the both the force and the popularity of video and audio and also other ways of communicating, and the demise in many ways of print as this sort of the esteemed, justified, verified form of communicating, has made us really have to rethink some of these ideas about what it is we trust. What does it mean to even trust media, to have faith in that? I mean, we've seen in politics how, I mean, what are Donald Trump's policies in something? Because a lot of his followers don't care. It's really they trust him and the personification of trust. And I think that we've seen something similar take place in the sort of media ecosystem.
100%. And that's exactly why I wrote the book. And in it somewhere, I talk about the Washington Post back when the Washington Post was this courageous institution, even like not that long ago, creating a database of the lies that Trump told in his first term in office. The number's in there somewhere, but it's an extraordinary sortable database. You can have fun with it. It's still online for now, anyway. I think it was actually. But like, where is the apparatus for verifying video statements? Where is the collection of both untruths that people have told in this medium, and how do you make sure you can create an apparatus of verification for video? Hopefully we'll get into that here today.
A few things surprised me there. Robert, when you said that you hadn't seen any sort of egregious examples of deep fake, on the level you expected. I disagree entirely. I think it's daily. In fact, I watch a French news program every evening, and every evening they show an example online, something that's gone viral, and why it's fake. And they analyze it and show you how it was made and where it was imported from. And this is one example in a given 24-hour news cycle. And in fact, my cousin works in New York, and his job is 24 hours a day verifying video for news feeds. And I don't know how they manage to do it. It's just on and on and on. So the other thing is, I know we're not going to get really into law today because there's such an enormous basket of laws about copyright and ownership. When you printed something about someone, you could be sued for libel back in the day. Now you put something up, it's wrong, it's taken down, it disappears. There's not even proof it was there. So this sort of ephemeral nature of video, I know, Peter, that's something you've talked to.
Yeah, but I mean,
yeah.
Just to contest that, if we're challenging each other on this interesting hour, I would just say, like, Trump has sued networks and journalists precisely for the what he considers to be the defamation that takes place in online, in televised and online video, its ephemerality existing or not. Quite the opposite, because it's there. It is somewhere someone has recorded it. So it is become perversely for this guy and his minions like a medium of record and a revenue generating one in this minor league capacity as well.
Well, I think you talked about the networks, him suing the networks. He's got very deep pockets, for one thing. He's got nothing else to do. He hates anything that disses him, even if it's true, or an opinion that he doesn't agree with. So he's got nothing else to do except go after it. But I'm talking about people that X all day long with fake videos, Russian videos, saying, Canada's the 51st state, and just stuff.
But to this point, I don't think there's been a war started, for example, or a major international treaty, rushed into emergency negotiations, or crimes being radically.
Well, no, but Biden did suffer from fake videos in his election campaign with things that were naturally morphed into
Let me
AI.
tell you something. The worst part about Biden's suffering was the real video in his election campaign, not the fake one.
Well, true. Let me just see what this person's put here. Someone says telling stories can mean telling something narrative. History is filled with narratives that are re-examined and edited. In this light, is telling a story telling an untruth?
When I use the phrase telling a story, I really mean the narrative function of journalism. My program is a very hard-nosed, empirically oriented American, no fiction allowed zone. Um, but it also recognizes the fact that we are in the entertainment business and we have to tell stories. We have to compel our readers or listeners to follow our stuff. That there's no assigned reading in this world. So we spend a lot of time on that. But no, I don't think telling stories means telling truth. I think there are plenty of true stories that. So to me, the best stories are the true stories. I mean, I read fiction plenty of time, but I'm a much bigger reader of nonfiction because I mean, it's the incredible stories that are true that really draw me in.
Same.
So this is a very interesting area. It's such an amorphous area. So Peter drew my attention to an Atlantic piece, which I think we've got in the chat there for people to read. And it's talking about how a reality TV show, The Apprentice, which was a fantastical creation starring Donald Trump, and it took some grooming, some work to get him up to speed, enabled eventually the American populace to believe this chap was presidential material and voted for him on the basis of that. So this is what worries me about the American desire to be almost seduced in some fantasy world. There's this Hollywood aspect now attached to public life. And that if it looks like you can do the job, well, you must be able to do the job, right? The fact that you could be acting is neither here nor there. So, where else in the world, I ask both of you this, do you think this could happen? And how did it happen here?
Did I go? I'll go.
Go ahead.
Um, I mean, Rob has written at length, over his illustrious career about Asia and media, um, um, also American media, also at length. But I know something about Russia and Central and Eastern Europe, and to some degree Ukraine as well. If you've ever been to Warsaw, there's a giant television tower in the center of the city, and Tadeusz Konviczki, the great novelist, whom I interviewed in like 1990, I don't know, one, told me that this was in effect a giant hypodermic needle injecting shite, to use probably a word I can use without offending our GBH listeners, into the body politic of the Polish nation. At the time, he was just coming out of 40 years of totalitarian thought control, and almost all of those under the spell of radio and television. The packaging of Trump by the most successful reality show producer of all time created a monster, an absolute monster. I mean, the media and technology tycoons surrounding the president at his White House inauguration, from Alphabet, right, the parent company, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, TikTok, X, you name it. They're the people who control the screens. They're the people who control the networks and the technologies that propagate the lies that we're forced to inhale every day. And you see them all there clapping and fawning. He invited them. He's not an idiot. I get into fights about this, more or less, not Boston style fights, New York style. He invited them. And what's worse is that they accepted, you know? And then he appointed his cabinet from Fox and X and World Wrestling Entertainment. And in that thing with Zelensky that we all saw around the world, he said it. He said, well, whatever that happens, this is going to make some great television. And he's transformed the highest office of the land that is supposed to be the leadership of the, free world into a television studio.
I think one of the uncomfortable things about Donald Trump, though, is that, and about politics in general, is how shot through with theater they are. I got to know Ed Koch, the mayor of New York City, during the last 20 years of his life or so. And he once told me, he said, being mayor is about 80% theater, 20%, urban politics and stuff like that. And he was a particularly, animated guy. Ronald Reagan, all sorts of other people. I mean, I think the fact is that theater has always had a role in politics. There have been, when you think about the leaders who have been anti or atheatrical, Clement Attlee or people like that, we think of them as sort of prigs, you know, uh, and I think that Trump sort of had a kind of genius for that. But early on, I have a friend who wrote a profile of him, magazine profile of him in the 80s, and she was just telling me the other day about when they were walking through his casinos in Atlantic City before they went bust and stuff. People loved him. They turned him, and one of them, and she quoted this to me, one guy says, "That guy's going to be president one day." I mean, he had a certain kind of charisma and understood how to channel that, and was able to take that with the help of Mark Burnett and other people to take that to the nth degree. But and also he considered running several times. He was very opportunistic. He's nothing if not, I mean, intelligent about his instincts about when the time is right for him to do something like that. So I think that in some ways that if there was a balance between substance and theater in politics, he has thrown that out just in the way that the balance between, I don't know, you know, tax money that's used for internal stuff and foreign aid was always sort of something one understood, that those were two things. It's just that and it's very much like Elon Musk's cutting and slashing. They've thrown out any kind of balance. There's no sense that there's a countervailing force in any way.
Somebody has put a note in about Trump and Reagan. We had this with Reagan, although he was a politician for a while. I think the difference with Reagan, he was a performer, no doubt about it, but he did have the humility to appoint decent people. I mean, they were strong. They knew I mean, Schultz knew what he was doing. These people weren't what the World Wrestling Federation. Uh, uh, so, I think even John Bolton, who is not my favorite person, but he seems to suddenly sound lucid these days. And he actually said, at least in the first administration, there were people appointed who had a modicum of expertise in the area that they were appointed. Now that's all out the window. Now,
Absolutely.
yeah.
I mean, yeah, just to jump in, like I remember giving a talk somewhere during the first Trump administration expressing thanks that we didn't have a ministry of culture in this country because all of the people whom he had appointed, even the first go round, just like this go round, except he feels more empowered. The Secretary of Education exists basically to dismantle the Department of Education. And mercifully, if we had a secretary, a minister of culture, that person would be dismantling all that we've got in terms of culture. So, that's the one benefit of not operating on the European model, perhaps under this guy.
Let's move over to the print world for a moment, Peter. In your book, you say we now only have 5 publishers that control 80% of the trade book market, 5 who control the academic market, and Amazon controls the entire US retail book sales. So we've tightened and concentrated the ownership of the publishing world, and we've created this consolidation of power at the same time. And now we add to the mix Elon Musk, who controls X, and he's in the administration. Well, supposedly in the administration. So if information is power, A, we've lost our freedom to participate, which you raise in the book. And then B, we're now losing our access to the plurality of information, all in one go. Could you comment on
Yeah,
that?
that's really cheerful. I'm just going to say yes.
You wrote it.
That's happening. Right. Oh, right. That's happening. And I think that it's devastating, actually. Made reference to the sycophants who control screen culture surrounding him. These aren't just tech bros. These are like screen bros. You know what I mean? Like we need to get with that idea. But not only have we let the medium run up on us, using the word sneaky, as you used it, Mary, or elusive, as Eisenstein, not the filmmaker, by the way, but the historian talks about. I quote in the book, but like we've let the medium, which is say television, video, screen culture generally, like run almost entirely unregulated, almost purely for profit, and without regard to its impacts on the minds of our citizens. As it happens, there's more regulation around the materials that go into your iPhone or your television than there is around the messages that get transmitted through it. And the reason for that is we're concerned about what might happen in terms of the manufacture and whether there's pollution and whether stuff goes into our lungs or our bloodstreams or something like that. Or the same is true, by the way, with books. There's more regulation around the ink, paper, and glue in a book than there is around the ideas. Now, we're attached as Americans, as advanced, members of an advanced civilization, to this concept of freedom of speech. But it's a weird thing that we don't regulate stuff that goes into our brains as much as we regulate things that go into our bloodstreams and our lungs. It's just food for thought.
The publishing dynamic you describe is particularly troublesome because one development feeds on the other. So you have this hyper consolidation in book publishing as a reaction to Amazon, right? They say we have to, in order to negotiate with Amazon, we have to have more power. So now there are basically two publishing behemoths, and Amazon still gets bigger and bigger. It's one of the things that was so disturbing about Jeff Bezos sort of giving in to Trump in all sorts of ways that the Washington Post, whatever else you thought of it, was really a stalwart in reporting without fear or favor, as the New York Times says. And now, I mean, and it's terrible because they've still got all these wonderful, hardworking, honest journalists there, but one is beginning to wonder about what the quality of what you get out of that paper because of the way that its owner is bending towards Trump. So you have this amelioration of all these different media, and to the point that the goal of people like Trump is they want to say, you see, all media is the same.
Right.
They're all biased. They're all full of their own vendettas and agendas. No one's any more right than anyone else. That's the ultimate goal, that there are no verifiable or verified sources.
And in the just jumping in, like in the book, I dwell on the importance of non-commercial platforms like Wikipedia and like the Internet Archive. And indeed, not enough in the book, frankly, hello, maybe a second edition, but like on some of the things like the Lenfest Foundation, Rob has sponsored, which is turning commercial journalism, which is in some sense failing because of the internet, into non-profit or not-for-profit journalism. And we have to wean ourselves, I think, a little bit, or maybe almost entirely, from commercial media, because in the end, the overwhelming logic of money turns out things over time that we will not be proud about today, looking ahead. So it's a challenge that, the most popular news network in America is Fox. It's relentless, and not enough is said about all of these talk shows, like MSNBC, will go on about the detrimental qualities of social media and now AI and stuff, without taking a look back and thinking or addressing the detrimental quality of television itself, and in particular commercial television, like the kind that Fox represents. So we really need to reorient our focus and come up with some alternatives, and we better do it fast while we can.
I was wondering about, since he's going after the democratic press and he's going after public information sources, which we discussed a couple of weeks ago, like public health communiques, have all been put on pause. So if there is an epidemic, nobody will be able to talk about it or communicate that information to the public, which is actually already happening with measles. So will we end up with different strata of information? In other words, you pay for right-wing propaganda because that's what you want. I might get my Substack or The Guardian, I subscribe to that, and we'll just live in altered universes. The only problem with that is the journalists won't be getting access to these things. That's the thing that worries me the most, that he's stopping the AP from attending press conferences or ProPublica. That's very worrisome to me. I mean, I'm prepared to pay for good information. I think it's a priority in my life. But if it isn't available, then you're really screwed. Then you are in a dictatorship.
You know, there's been so much talk about information bubbles and how we're sort of isolated from each other in that way. And I don't doubt that that's empirically true. What I wonder, though, is whether it is that we've sorted ourselves into the information bubbles such that, you know, the kind of person who wants to believe such and such will wean himself on only such and such material. And the kind of person who is inclined to believe something else will believe something else. The idea that we're sort of victims and trapped in them, I find a little unlikely, just because we are. I mean, I look at my students, they're such promiscuous, you know, consumers of information. They don't they get stuff from everywhere. No, you know, no one reads the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal. They get links from all sorts of sources. They look at video, they look at other things, but uh you know, it's in some ways I think it's hard to limit your media diet to something, because you are sort of being, you know, what you are awash in all sorts of sources. So I don't know. I think that the deeper problem is that we've become fractured emotionally, politically into these subgroups, and then we look for sources that give us sustenance in those views. That's more of a, I don't know, a political problem than it is a media problem, though.
Yeah, and I hang up here with some like sociologists and some folks who address what they call the dynamics of belief. And it's the case that we also may be predestined or something, hardwired or wired in some way to believe, to be willing to accept things that don't have evidence, in the sense that 90% of Americans believe in something like religion or the supernatural. 80% of us over that believe in angels. It's a true story. So if there are 106 people participating today, a good 20, I don't know, like I work at MIT, I can't do that math, maybe rob you. But like there's some number of people who are on this, who believe in this stuff, you know, believe in that. And therefore, like, we are, not because we believe in religion, but because our minds have space to accept things without evidence. We may be in this place for the long haul. Yeah, so there's a lot more to say about that and these bubbles.
We've got a few comments and questions coming in here. First of all, someone says, on a happier and healthier note, many thinkers have turned to self-publishing and publishing by small groups which use bulk printing. News of these works spread almost by word of mouth. A small market probably, but a healthy and often more interesting one. So that's back to the old-fashioned community press, right? So is there any hope that substance, reason, and facts will overcome the incompetent, rage-filled liars that look good on TV and social media? I find Neil Postman's book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, provides understanding to what is happening, but nothing on how to overcome it. Any comments on that? I don't know. Another audience member, it may be a cliche, but having at one point studied Latin American literature, where the novel of the dictator genre was perfected using magical realism, storytelling, to circumvent censorship, I want to defend the use of storytelling and employing fiction to speak truth to power as a tool of resistance. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I would add poetry to that, by the way, as a Russianist. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, but I think that there is, I mean, speaking of Russia and the Eastern Bloc, I mean, there is a sort of samizdat sort of feel to some of this sort of independent publishing, whether it's, online or in, various blogs or Substack or something like that. And I think it's to the good. I mean, I think that writers getting paid or thinkers, journalists getting paid for what they do in some way is a good thing. I just do wonder about the kind of, there's a publicness to mass communication. There's a way in which, you do sit down with people and talk about the things you've all read in common. And that I do worry about some of this Substack stuff that everyone has their own person they're reading. And I don't, this is not about the thought bubble sort of problem, but just that I just do worry about that we've become such sort of private people or so alienated from other people that there isn't the larger conversations that great journalism used to encourage.
And on the other side of that, I'm with you. Like, is the terror that, we're developing a kind of government broadcast network in this country, of the kind that used to exist in some of the places where samizdat was relied upon to, escape that mind meld. The next book I'm working on is about the sociology of knowledge. And that was a field that came into its own. There's a big long German name that I'm not going to butcher, German word or whatever. But it's no accident that it came of age and of place, in effect, in the 1930s in Central and Central Europe, when scholars right there in the heart of it all, in the Austro-Hungarian situation, began to notice what was going on in Germany and Austria, with the media becoming almost entirely state-controlled, radio especially, but also film, textbooks, newspapers. And, uh,
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of a situation. So I'm particularly worried about the centralization, consolidation of message making with the alliance. I didn't see Murdoch at the inauguration, but he was there. You know what I mean?
In spirit.
Yeah.
Speaking of Murdoch, you had mentioned in your New York Times piece, Robert, this was talking about copyright issues, which we're not going to go into because there's a lot of it, about using copyrighted material without permission for purposes of commentary, criticism, or parody. And that just lit my heart up, that word parody. And I was wondering if that isn't the last defense against dictatorship. Talking
I,
of Murdoch, back in the 80s, I went to see a play in London called Pravda, which was dynamite. It was sold out, this play. And it was Anthony Hopkins satirizing Rupert Murdoch and questioning the role of journalism under Thatcher. And it was truly marvelous. So I was wondering if that is the next thing we're going to see, parody and satire emerging as a defense in theatre. What do you
I
think?
was so glad you brought this up because I've often thought this is the underexplored sort of form of resistance. The dictator, the figure of the dictator, the one thing he almost always he can't stand is being laughed at. Kim Jong-un
Mhm.
has been laughed at, has been parodied, has been criticized forever. When the movie The Interview came out, in which he is literally a laughing stock and a parrot, a figure of a parody and that was enough to tip him off into the whole Sony hack and all that sort of stuff. That was that insult. It was so devastating. And I feel like Trump too. I mean, when he's been laughed at, you see the whole thing fall. There's that one moment when he was addressing the United Nations during his first term, and he made some ridiculous, bombastic comment about no one's ever achieved what we've achieved, and the entire room just cracked up. and he was disarmed. He went, well, I wasn't quite expecting that reaction, like that. But humor like that, I think, is effective. I don't know if it's going to change what's going on in this country, but I do feel that humor and satire are forms of resistance, forms of fighting back that too often we we don't use, because I think there's such a sort of serious-minded somberness on the left among progressives as well. It doesn't We don't do humor well,
We're
but I
down.
think it's something that would help us.
I mean, yeah, on that, um, I'm always up for a good laugh and a good laugh, which is probably why I hang out with both of you whenever I can, But and I used to work at Broadway Video, Lorne Michaels's company. I sold a company to Broadway Video and worked there for a bunch of years, long time ago. But for every Saturday, but for every Saturday, for every Saturday Night Live and for every comedy channel or whatever, there's something about it. Like I want, I do want like a tar and feathers network, or like
That spitting image.
yeah, ride the bastards out of town on a rail channel. That's what it would be called, or like the Torch and Pitchfork show, because there's something about this. I loved Jon Stewart and the guy whom he had at the very beginning, who assembled the clips for each show. I invited him to a thing I was teaching, like unbelievable talent, unbelievable ability to react to media with media and the moving image in particular. Not enough about that actually in the book, but man, there's something about that that lets you go to sleep easily.
Mm.
You watch the show or you watch
Well, I think it does two things. I think one is it gives you comic relief, which is
right.
much needed. But the other thing is it's actually a reality check because enough people are laughing, like you said, at the people at the UN. Enough people are laughing at the same thing, so we can't all be mad. I think that's the thing. It balances out somehow the state of affairs.
You mean
So,
mad crazy or mad angry? We
no,
can't be mad.
no, it balances out.
Yeah.
If you've got enough people laughing at something of enormous import, because you can't take it literally because it's just too horrific. It's like the accidental death of an anarchist. Do you remember Dario Fo's? He did the same stuff. And you're right about the parody, because I remember when he was being up for election, there was a lot of effigies in England of Trump, huge inflatable effigies that went round um, because people couldn't take it seriously. They're taking it seriously now, but they couldn't take it seriously. So let's move along to another question on the parody thing. Parody, fair use, is an important public value. Now this is being turned against us because the AI moguls are blasted through copyright protections to build their products. Anyone want to take that question? I don't know enough
I
about.
will a bit. I mean, I think it's absolutely true. I mean, fair use is something I've written about. I'm fascinated by, because it does seem like one of those flexible, fair use. There's no absolute rule of fair use. There are four principles. It's I always say fair use is like a muscle. You only can use it. If you don't use it, it withers. And there is a terror of exercising fair use in certain fields, video, film, television, movies being one of them. And Peter's book is brilliant on this. He goes into it both about the problems of it, but also some possible solutions, or at least remedies for it. But I think that's absolutely true that, the private use of things. So the questioner was asking about um, amateur radio and things like that. I'm sorry, no, I'm not
That was a separate one.
question
This is just being
about
turned against us because AI moguls are blasting through copyright protections to build.
that's right. That's
Up.
right. Well, that's true, but that's actually an argument sort of, I mean, I think that they're they're not, it's not so much fair use, it's another form of use. But the fair use has become so restrictive that it is very difficult to use the sort of sources, the text, as it were, the video text that we want to use that for purposes. even if it is a fair purpose and parody or criticism or it's some transformative use, the legal regimes will keep you from doing that. Peter discusses this very well about how you just can't even get insurance for something if you want to circulate it publicly if it exercises fair use justification, because the lawyers are so terrified of that. And universities, they have become even more adverse to this. And you see, this kind of thing is the result of also the litigiousness of people like Trump. They want to keep everyone a little bit scared. I know at my university it is that way. There, everyone's a little bit, not a little bit, a lot scared of all sorts of things.
Yeah, it's also like the acceptance of this entire neoliberal framework that defines ideas as property or media um, productions as property first before other things. I mean, that's not necessarily true if you think about it. But we've accepted that. Speaking of narratives, Rick Prellinger, who's this extraordinary kind of archivist and educator and filmmaker, whom I'm getting the chance also to talk with later this month. Used to be board chair of the Internet Archive in San Francisco. He talks about the culture of excessive deference. It's an unbelievably great phrase. I have to
Say
work.
that again, Peter.
The culture of excessive deference, which is that we're accepting that someone else necessarily owns this, and we're thankful that we can, work in exception to the governing laws and rules. Uh, um, I think that's pretty much a lousy road to go down. And so we need to figure out ways not only of basing our media when we do produce it, and keeping it on non-commercial community-owned platforms, but also making sure that the rights that we negotiate and the efforts that we point ourselves toward are toward freely licensed productions that other people can use and reuse. Because I can't rely on Rob's fair use argument for the derivative work that I try to create from his work. So it's a problem.
We've only got about 5 or so minutes left, and I should sort of talk a little bit about censorship, because two things came to mind. One was I read that one of the Oscars, I went to a foreign film. It was about the Israeli-Palestine situation, and nobody's been able to see this. It can't get distribution permission in any cinemas, which I thought was totally bizarre, to get an award for something that nobody can watch. So that was one thing. Then the other thing was when I saw Trump and Vance going at Zelensky and calling him a dictator, accusing him of invading Russia, I was suddenly reminded of Tiananmen Square and the fact that the Chinese have purged all proof that ever occurred from all their archives. And I just wondered, I hope someone somewhere is recording and keeping all this stuff, Peter. Perhaps you can tell us, so that there's proof that these things happened.
Well, the most important thing to record and keep is today's discussion. So thank you very much, WGBH, for doing that. I mean, that's the core of the book, really, and the hardest thing to do and the most important thing to focus on. Examples in my book include footage, that Assange liberated on WikiLeaks of America at war and war crimes being committed in our name. There's probably a link to that. It's worth dropping into the chat. Or Darnella Fraser's recording of the murder of George Floyd, on an iPhone posted to Facebook. Interviews with Holocaust survivors. All of that, I would submit it's the most important task in front of us now, to figure out how not only we can cite material within video in the same way that we, have come to rely on an apparatus of footnotes, endnotes, and bibliographies for the print medium, but preserving the content, authenticating the content, and protecting it from removal. Right now in Massachusetts, people are scrubbing online sites around the parks and monuments that refer to, you know, the triumphs of the LGBTQ movement or the civil rights movement. We're scrubbing that willingly, like some people are willing, like we're all under this. The views I express here are my own and do not necessarily reflect the, but we are willingly doing that. And that is, that's not the way to show up for a gunfight.
Okay, my last question is about the healthy democracies have always had whistleblowers. It's been part of the scene that this is how you keep the record straight and you keep governments accountable. So Trump is now throwing money at all sorts of people, the Des Moines Register, for one, for actually telling the truth about a poll that he just doesn't like the outcome of. So does this mark the end, not just of journalism, but of all investigative journalism, Rob?
There's been a real effort on the Trump and the right wing to overturn the Sullivan decision, which is the basis on which all the kind of investigative journalism rests. Simply, it sort of defines an allowable form of journalism that makes mistakes, and that those mistakes are not going to be things that are going to bankrupt you. So, you know, really, and there's now a concerted effort among lawyers in the legal world to try to figure out a way to defend that. But I think that without Sullivan, without ideas like that, I think it is the end of investigative journalism, because either you're going to be too small to ever dare to do that and have the wherewithal and have the money to do that, or you're so big that there's too much to lose. And so, you know, I don't know what side would. I think Peter's idea of nonprofits, I mean, ProPublica and other places, which has a battery of lawyers, that might be the last man standing in this kind of fight.
Yeah, I mean, it was a nightmare before Trump, even if you want to go there. You know, we've tended to coagulate all of our horrors and fears around this new administration, what have you. But like Cy Hirsch, right? For whatever you're going to say about like this guy, and Rob, you and I haven't talked about Cy Hirsch, but I don't know. You know more about him than I ever will. You've forgotten more about him. But he's on Substack now.
Yeah.
This is the guy who broke the My Lai massacre. This is the guy who basically broke Abu Ghraib. And he's written, you know, on the Nord Stream pipeline, right? Not exactly a great place to end this discussion because it stimulates all kinds of wrong reactions, possibly. But the incredible concept that maybe Russia blew it up themselves, even though Gazprom owned most of it. And he's basically, but he's either receded himself or been denied the platforms that he used to have by a concoction of decision making made for commercial and political reasons. And that is, frankly, the most dangerous thing of all, which is, you know, is it only a Trump that brings us to these places, or is it something else about the setup of our system?
We've got a last question here. Will Trump have a presidential library with all his records and correspondence?
God, I hope we create, you know, the audiovisual, like, because the record of the Trump administration, I go into at great length the January 6th record, which has tens of millions of audiovisual records that came up in front of that committee. That committee did the angels' work in sorting through all of this material. I imagine that the Trump library, you know, will have all the books that Trump read, you know, one shelf, all the books that he actually wrote, even smaller, and wouldn't it be great if it was an audiovisual library, a kind of Borgesian vision, but of the modern moment.
Have you got any cheery words for us to end on, Robert, there?
I like the idea of creating a de facto presidential library that is would be a audiovisual testament to those years. I think that's a great idea, and it could live in cyberspace, you know, and be hosted by the Internet Archive or something like that. I think that's actually a laudable goal.
Is that a charity, the Internet Archive? Who funds that?
It is. It's a nonprofit.
Amazing. Thank goodness all these things are being done by somebody, right? Like
It's
Wikipedia.
unbelievable.
Wikipedia is another huge philanthropic endeavor.
It is indeed.
Well, that was an amazing discussion, gentlemen. This is an interesting book, The Moving Image, Peter's book. I'd like to thank you both for your expertise and your valuable time that you shared with us today, Peter Kaufman and Robert Boynton. Thank you all for joining us today. I look forward to seeing you all in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.